Well, I've still got my camera backpack on because I just got back from Mosaic Christian Church, where I just filmed an interview and tour video with Pastor Kuhl. And what you're about to see is the interview portion of the time I spent there, where we talk about what it means to be an evangelical, how we might reclaim that word, and specifically this image of the church as a place with blood-stained pews, a place of vulnerability and a hospital for sinners. I found it to be an utterly compelling picture of what the church can and should be, and I hope you do too. Hey, I just want to say real quick, if you're grateful for videos like these, if they're blessing you and you want to see more of them, be sure to head to patreon.com/gospelsimplicity to support the show, to help it keep going and growing, and to get all types of fun perks as well. Well, with all that being said, here's the interview. Well, Carl, we have just had a wonderful tour. Thank you so much for your time. I'm excited to sit down and talk a little bit about what the evangelical church can and should be, specifically talking through your recent book that just came out, Bloodstained Pews, which people can see behind us, and they probably saw on the tour everywhere, which I'm really excited about. I was telling you earlier, I remember years ago when you used this as an illustration in a sermon saying, this is going to be my second book. And then when it came out, it was super exciting to see. But as we start at kind of the broadest level before we get into the book specifically, I want to talk about this idea of, I said what the evangelical church can and should be, but over the past few years, that's a word that has gotten an increasingly sour taste in a lot of people's mouths. And I know for some people, they have come to the point of saying, like, there just seems to be no redeeming that word. I'm not going to use it to describe what I'm doing myself or my church. How do you feel about that word?
I hope we can redeem the word, because at its core, evangelical simply means Christian or church that believes the Bible is the Word of God and Jesus alone offers salvation. And so I think that's a good thing. And I get there's been a lot of baggage, right? And so some people, the surveys say, associate evangelicalism with Trumpism.
Sure.
Or evangelicalism with many other different negative things, people would say. It kind of gets into, I was recently asked this question. I was training a church staff in Liverpool, England, which you have to go to Liverpool if you haven't been. All right, I'm down. But they're doing great things, and one of their staff asked me, what do you think, it was very practical, like how do you do this with your staff or this with your small groups? But then one of them asked, what do you see as the biggest problem in the church in the West?
Oh, great question.
And I have an answer right away because I've had so many conversations about this. And to set it up, I got to take you back in time a few years. You may be too young to remember this because I
get that a lot.
You can see, like, I got this little white going on right here. But when I was a really little kid, like back in the 80s, and then even as I grew up in the 90s, there was something called the prosperity gospel.
Yeah.
And so on TV, you had these prosperity gospel preachers who gave Christianity a bad name. And their pitch essentially came down to, send me money and God will answer your prayer. I mean, that's literally what they said.
Yeah. And
as you can imagine, if you are, like, if someone you love is dying, I'll do anything. I'll send you money. If there's a 0.0000001% chance of it saving them. But you can also understand that that has a limited shelf life because pretty soon people are going to realize that doesn't work. And obviously, anyone watching this channel, I would hope, would know that's not in line with the scriptures.
I would hope. If you don't, now you know.
Now you know. Go study. But it's just not going to work. It's not sustainable. Today, what I think we have in the West is something much more insidious. And it's what my friend John termed the emotional prosperity gospel.
Interesting.
And the emotional prosperity gospel doesn't proclaim the good news, it proclaims the happy news. Where it's not good in that it meets your deepest need, it's happy because that's how you will walk out of church today.
Yeah.
And the danger of the emotional prosperity gospel that exists to make me feel better about myself and give me my best life today is that for the most part, these preachers or authors or podcasters, all of them, won't say anything not true.
Yeah.
Their sermons, their books are based on scripture. Like Jesus came to give us life to the full, and blessed is this person, and blessed is that person. And so what they say is true. The problem is they just don't say all that's true.
Yeah.
Meaning you won't hear in these environments, whether it's a book or a sermon, pick up your cross and, hey, there's a place called hell and sin is evil and repentance is hard and, hey, okay, men are the head of the home, but what that actually means is they have to be like Jesus and they're just going to die every day. Not just, oh, it's just this perfect marriage. It's your life gets harder when you follow Jesus. And so I think where evangelicalism gets a bad rap at times, accurately so, is when people are exposed to the emotional prosperity gospel, and when life gets hard, it doesn't help. Because yes, I do want to feel better about my problems, and I would love a perfect life today. That's just not what happens when you follow Jesus. I mean, it's Hebrews 11, right? It's like, hey, this person overcame, but we got to read the end of the chapter. And this person was sawed in two, and this person was fed to lions, and this person lived in the wilderness.
Yeah, I think that's so powerful, and I think you're so right that it's a lot more insidious because it's not lies, it's half-truths. Or it's not the whole truth, and you're getting part of it. And honestly, I think so many people, we've been cultured into this way of church where I go to church to feel better at the end. Like that, I fill my tank on Sunday, right? I had a tough week, and there's not necessarily something wrong with wanting to feel better after church. But I think what a lot of people find is it's kind of like only having dessert, you know? It's like every week you come in, and it works for a little, and it feels good, but eventually you run out of steam. And I think that's part of where we see so much deconstruction happening is, this worked for a time in my life, but then things got hard, and I didn't have a shelf space for that. My church didn't prepare me for this cancer diagnosis, or didn't prepare me for the divorce, or didn't prepare me for these difficult times. And then they think, well, maybe there's just nothing there of substance. And that's why I'm excited about books like this. I'm excited about what you're doing here. I'm excited about what you guys do at Mosaic, and I don't just say this because, you know, I'm sitting here, right, and you agreed to give me your time, but something I've always been impressed by is just how real you guys are here. And it's something I admire in your preaching and the people that you guys bring on the platform is it's a place where we're going to talk about life as it is, not necessarily only as we want it to be.
I hope so.
Yeah. And so talk to me about this image of blood-stained pews. I find it fascinating. It makes for a great book title. And people might rightly notice they don't see any pews in here. Maybe they caught one or two on the tour.
My kid actually asked me when this book came out, Dad, what's a pew? So I had to explain that. So a few years ago, the genesis of this book really was my wife was out with some friends one night. My little kids were in bed. We didn't have any streaming services or cable, so I'm flipping through our 5 TV stations. I end up watching this documentary on PBS about World War II, and you know, World War II fascinates me, so I immediately latched onto it. And it was specifically about these 2 medics who were paratroopers on D-Day. And they ended up in this out-of-the-way town that wasn't a strategic foothold, but fighting broke out. They identify this 900-year-old church as what they're going to set up as their aid station. They put like the Red Cross flag on the door, and they take turns bringing in soldiers and working on them. But they place them on the pews, right? So they can work on guys who've been shot. And, you know, the windows get shot out, a mortar round comes through the ceiling, you know, German soldiers burst in at one point and don't shoot. But after the war, and they put together the church again, they put together, they replaced the stained glass, they fixed the roof and all the things, but as they look at the pews, they have blood on them from where the soldiers had been worked on. But they didn't replace the pews. They didn't get, you know, sand them down or something. They just left them. Because they said this church was built 900 years ago to be a place of hope and healing for those who are hurting, and that's what it was on D-Day. So we will preserve the bloodstained pews in memory of those who came here to heal. And I'm seeing this documentary, and my wife gets home, and I'm sitting there watching this like documentary crying. My wife says, babe, are you okay? Do I need to get you some professional help? And I said to her, I've just seen the best image of church I've ever seen. Because how many people, you mentioned the word deconstruction, how many people today, when they think of church, think of words like judgmental or irrelevant or shallow? And I think in those bloodstained pews, you see what Jesus wants the church to be. Right? It's a place that's on mission. We all say, I think, it's supposed to be a hospital for the hurting, not a museum of the saints or something. But we have to work to get it there. And I realized the reason I really sold out to Jesus at the beginning of my Christian walk is because I was a broken punk kid who's on the inside, his life was falling apart. And I came to church, metaphorically crawled into church every week, and I got grace. Like, I was shown grace, I learned about grace, grace penetrated my heart, and I realized this is all that matters for somebody who's hurting and broken.
Yeah.
And that's the church I want to be a part of.
I love that. And I think that's, I imagine what so many people have found here. And your vision of being a church for people who don't go to church. And I feel like that really ties into this idea of the bloodstained pews, because you're right. I think so many people either think it's shallow, it's judgmental, or I've heard people say, I can't walk into a church, the place would burn down.
Right.
It's not a place for people like me. And you guys seem to be really trying to take that head on and say, no, this is a place for you. And this is a place for you, not just when you're cleaned up, but this is a place for you as you are and in the mess of all of it. And I'm curious how that shaped, as we've gone through, if people watch the tour video, they saw how that shaped this space, but how does that shape practically what you're doing here? Because I think there's a temptation for a lot of people to say, yeah, that's a compelling image. Let's make that a book title, right?
Yeah.
And I hope they go buy the book. But then they wonder, like, we just fall into our old ways of doing church. So kind of in the brass tacks, what does that look like to be a church with bloodstained pews?
Yeah, I'll give you a few different things. I got to tell you, you talk about, like, if I walk in church, it'll burn down.
Yeah.
We just baptized somebody who hadn't been in church in years, and she was nervous to come here because she said the last time she went in church 10 years ago, it literally burnt down the next week. I was like, I thought that was just an expression, but it literally happened for you.
Oh, man.
I think there's a few different levels that we have to fight for a church of bloodstained pews, because the reality is all of us want to drift towards safety. All of us want to drift towards what we know. All of us drift towards comfort in every area of our life. But to have a church that's really of bloodstained pews, where our vulnerability can collide with the gospel of Jesus, and that's when I think true community happens, we have to fight our comfort and our own safety. And so here's what I mean. A couple different ways a Christian and a church has to live this out. One is you have to go first. Because we always want to say, well, the church this, or the leader that, or that person this. And it's like, no. I can't control what they do. I can control me, so I have to be vulnerable first. Yeah. And that's scary, right? Because, like, if everybody else has been vulnerable, then, it's easy. I can be as vulnerable because you were vulnerable. But, like, somebody has to go first to initiate the vulnerability and the safety of a gospel-centered community that we all want. Yeah. And everybody in the circle is thinking somebody needs to go first. Yeah. And so what that means is if I want it, I have to go first. The way I talk about it is we get that feeling where we have the bubble guts, right? When we have something we don't want to share. And when I have that feeling, that's when I know that's the thing I need to share, right? And I'm not talking about emotional vomiting, like horrible boundaries. We've met that person who tells you like their worst sin in your first 5 seconds, and you're like, I think you just don't understand relationships. But when we like are saying, hey, we're going to live as community, we have to take a risk beyond what feels safe to do that. And that means I have to do that. It means you have to do that. It means I have to do it in my marriage. It means I have to do it with my kids. It means I have to do it in a sermon. It means I have to do it in a Bible study. It means I have to do it at breakfast this morning with my friend David. Like we always have to get to that space, which is hard because I just want to be comfortable and not be vulnerable for once.
I feel that.
Another way that it really lives out is in the stories we tell. My mentor, Jim Bergen, lives out this bloodstained pews idea really well. He's mentored me over the years in it. And I said, how do you keep this type of culture in a church without it just everything being perfect? Jesus makes your life perfect. And his quote was, you have to keep telling stories and tell them before they have a bow on them. Yeah. And I love that. Because in my sin nature, honestly, in my selfishness, I want everybody's story to have a bow on it. Sure. Because that gives me hope that my story will have a bow on it. So when you show the video story of the married couple that struggled, I want it to end with, today our marriage is perfect because we follow Jesus.
And here's our free ebook and 6-week
exactly.
class. Yeah.
Because that's what I want my marriage to be perfect. Yeah. Right? When I hear the person talking about the struggles of parenting, I want it to end with, and now all my kids love Jesus and they're married to perfect people and they're impacting the kingdom and making lots of money and it's just all perfect. Yeah. That's how I want it to end, honestly. Yeah. But that's just not real. And so I have to fight, our team has to fight always the temptation to tell stories that go like this. I was a mess, I gave my life to Jesus, and now things are great. Because the way stories most of the time are is, my life was a mess, I gave my life to Jesus, And some things got a whole lot better, but some things got a whole lot harder. But I have a peace and a hope to get me through that I didn't have otherwise, and I have a deeper fulfillment in life than I could have without Jesus. Yeah. And that's why I follow Jesus.
It's no secret that today, perhaps more than ever, people are struggling with their mental health. I think if I asked you all to virtually raise your hand and said, hey, are you currently struggling? Do you consistently struggle with mental health, be it anxiety, depression, or whatever? I think many of us, myself included, would raise our hand and say, yeah, like things get hard sometimes, and sometimes it feels like more than we can handle. But the problem is, despite facing these difficult circumstances and dealing with these mental health crises at times, so few of us end up actually getting the help that we need. It might be because it can take so long to get into a counselor or therapist, or you think it's going to be too much, or maybe there's this thought in the back of your head that Christians aren't allowed to have mental health problems. And does that mean there's something wrong with me? Well, from the beginning of my channel, far before it had any type of reach or influence, I have wanted to do my part to help end that stigma. That's why one of my first videos I ever made was titled, "You Can Have Jesus and a Therapist Too," hoping that would give people the permission to go out and get the help they need without being worried about these shameful stigmas that people have attached to it. Well, now I am so excited to be partnering with Faithful Counseling, who are leading the charge in helping people get the help they need. Rather than having to wait months to get into a counselor, if you sign up for Faithful Counseling, you can be paired with a counselor in 24 hours or less. I don't know if you've ever attempted to do something like this through traditional avenues, but if you have, you know just how crazy it is to be able to pair up with someone that quickly. All of their counselors are licensed and have over 3,000 hours of experience. You can connect with them in flexible ways. You can do video sessions, phone calls, private messaging. It is really fantastic. They even have a live chat. It is such an amazing service. I'm so excited to be partnering with them, and I'd really encourage you to check them out. You're going to faithfulcounseling.com/gospelsimplicity. If you do so, you'll get 10% off your first month, and I think it will be really, really helpful for you. Now, I do want to say that this isn't a crisis line, and if you are experiencing suicidal thoughts or ideation, I would encourage you so much to not go through this alone, but to reach out to a crisis line. I'll put one on the screen here. But if you are looking for mental health help, I think Faithful Counseling could be great for you. They will connect you with a Christian counselor, and I know people come to my channel from a variety of backgrounds. So if you want one specifically from your Christian denomination, they will work with you to try to make that happen so that you can get Christian mental health help. I think it's going to be fantastic for you. I can't wait for you to check it out. Again, that's faithfulcounseling.com/gospelsimplicity. You get 10% off your first month. After that, it will be $260 per month, but there is financial aid available for those who qualify. Once again, guys, don't hesitate to get the help you need. faithfulcounseling.com/gospelsimplicity.
I love that. And I think that we tend to think that we have to tell the story with a bow on it, or else people won't like that story. They won't respond to it. But I think people just, they see through it.
Yes, in time they do.
In time,
yes,
yeah.
yes.
And that's like that idea of, those half-truths or the dessert. It works for a time, but then eventually it runs out. You run out of steam. And I think in the long term, what people are really looking for today, I think for a lot of the people that have been hurt by the church, is something that feels real. Something that isn't, you're not selling me on this, 6-step course that's going to have my life perfect by the end. But help me take the next step forward and help me keep walking. And will you walk with me?
Yeah.
And will you keep walking with me when you see the sides of me that I don't want people to see and I haven't let people see? And I think that's a beautiful thing, to be a culture where you're taking that first step and you're moving towards that, and you're also being real about the fact that this might not end perfectly for you, but I hope you can have peace on that journey. And I hope we're going to be a kind of culture that walks with you on the way there. A big part of what we're talking about here, and it's come up a couple of times, is this word vulnerability.
Yeah.
And I kind of want to look at two angles on that, because I think there might be two common responses people have to that word. On the one hand, it's a buzzword in our culture.
Yeah.
And we've learned that it's a good thing.
Yes.
We've got, our high prophetess, Brene Brown, for vulnerability. Yes. and I say that somewhat in jest, but I love her work.
Yeah,
and it's
absolutely.
great. And I'm glad she's doing it. And so I think there might be people that they say, oh, okay, this is good, and now it's in the church, and they might have some hesitations on how that works in the church, and we'll get to that in a second. But I want to talk to the people that maybe have this strong sense of like, oh, that's Brene Brown out in the world, and this is church, and are we just taking this cultural thing of vulnerability and trying to baptize it for Jesus? Like,
Yeah.
tell me, like, how this actually isn't something that Brene Brown came up with. It's not something new, but it's actually something that's part of the gospel. You're not just kind of capitalizing on something in the moment.
Right. So the Brene Brown stuff really impacted me. I mean,
Yeah.
if you haven't watched her TED Talks, great. You got to go do it.
You really do.
You know, she has multiple great resources. And a lot of people have been set free by this because they've realized that carrying stuff alone doesn't work.
Yeah.
And a lot of her work is about simply getting it out there and living in a community where you can say, here's what I'm afraid of, or here's what I'm scared of, or here's my past, here's the shame, here's my baggage, or here's my happiness at the same time, all of it. And we experience freedom in that because there's no freedom in isolation. Yeah. Like that is a scriptural ideal, right?
Sure.
There's no freedom in isolation. It is not good for man to be alone. What's the only thing that wasn't good in creation? Being alone. That's it. And so I think that's part of it. But here was where that stuff fell short for me, is a lot of the message about vulnerability in our culture says, you're good enough and you're worthy. And it's like, I am worthy. I'm not defined by my shame or that thing that happened to me or my thoughts or my imperfections. And that's a great message. But I realized as I was being exposed to not just Brene Brown, but all the stuff out there on vulnerability, I could connect the dots as a Christian because I knew why I was good enough and I knew why I was worthy. And if I don't have the gospel, all of that falls short because it's me just convincing myself that I'm worthy or that I'm good enough. But the foundational truth of me in Scripture is that I'm good. And I know in church a lot we want to jump to you're an evil sinner, and yes, we'll get there.
Sure.
But the first thing God says about me, Genesis 1, is I'm good. I'm very good.
Yeah.
Right? Genesis 1, 26 and 27. It was very good. And so without the gospel, I'm just trying to believe that because.
Yeah.
But it's because of the gospel. I know I was created good, and it's through Jesus I am made worthy to be in God's presence. So the worst thing I did doesn't define me. What they did doesn't define me. Jesus defines me. So that's why I say it's only when our vulnerability collides with the gospel that we experience the freedom God wants us to have. And if you think about it, how do we come to Christ? We have to be, you use the word humble or repent, right? It's the tax collector who says, God have mercy on me, a sinner. He was repenting in a humble way. And that's what we mean when we talk about vulnerability is I'm not good enough. I am unworthy, but because I was created by God and because Jesus died on the cross for me, I am good and I am worthy. And that's the key difference.
Yeah, I really love that. And, when you were saying that, the idea popped up in my head that the kind of cultural vocabulary around, or the cultural mode of entering into this space of vulnerability is kind of its own new blind faith, in that it's, I'm worthy because I say I am. And I'm glad that people are experiencing some level of freedom through that. And I don't want to bash that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there is so much power when it's able to be grounded in something real.
Yes.
It's grounded in the gospel. And when those two things meet, like you said, you experience true freedom. I really appreciate that. I want to shift a little bit to people who see where we're at and see, maybe they've been around spaces like this, and they see this beautiful space behind us with the lights and everything like that. And they say, Carl, I hear you talking about vulnerability, right? But when I grew up in the church, and increasingly now people are like me, where they grew up in a church like this, right? Like they didn't grow up on pews, they grew up in movie theater seats. And I think what I've seen for so many of those people, and maybe people who have come to my channel who have started to maybe deconstruct their faith, or they're wondering where's the substance, is they say, I love this message on vulnerability, but I'm just not sure I actually see that living out in the church. When I come to church, I see everything kind of perfect. Every little thing is taken care of, and I see singers that look airbrushed with their matching denim jackets and their perfect ripped jeans and their outfits that cost more than I make in a week. And they're saying, how do these things line up? And there's multiple avenues you could take that, but I'm sure that's something you get here, because I remember being on staff at a church like this, And we'd hear those questions of, this just doesn't feel authentic.
Yeah.
And so when people say, Carl, I love that you're talking about vulnerability, but how does that really map onto the church? How would you answer them?
I have a couple different answers.
Yeah.
One is, I think in whether you call it deconstruction or doubting or asking healthy questions, I think we have to be very careful between having two attitudes. I think it's very healthy to have a attitude of skepticism.
Yeah.
Skepticism is asking honest questions.
Sure.
Jesus never gets mad at anyone for asking an honest question. Search the Gospels, he'll never, he gets mad, but never for asking an honest question.
Yeah.
But the dangerous side of that is cynicism. And cynicism is where you're asking questions not because you have an actual question, but really just to bash and tear down.
Yeah.
And Jesus rips those people apart,
Yeah.
right? When he gets asked, hey, well, how does marriage work? Well, I'm just going to trap you in your own question, right? Or what about this? And he's like, how long do I have to put up with you guys, right? If people ask honest questions, Jesus is patient with you every day of the week. And I think we have to be careful. I'll just speak for me.
Yeah.
In my journey of the church, of growing up in church and Bible college and the unique environment that is, and working in a church, then starting a church, I've gone through all the phases, right? And I think when I'm healthy is when I'm saying, God, I know there's an answer and I don't understand the answer to this honest question. I need help. There's a difference in my attitude in that and saying, Jesus, what you started is stupid.
Yeah.
And that's a dangerous place to be.
Yeah.
And I don't understand why Jesus started the church, because I would have done it different. I would have just stayed here forever and been like, not had a pope, I would have been the pope, right? Or something. So that's part of it.
Yeah.
Is a humility that each of us need to have.
Yeah, that posture we bring to it.
Absolutely. No church is going to get it right. I am positive you could find things I've said that this church has done that you say, Carl, that's not what you write about. And I'd be like, you're right, I'm sorry, we messed that one up. Part of the answer also is what we talked about earlier, that you have to be the instigator of it.
Yeah.
Of, you know what, I don't know what the people on stage are doing. I don't know what that staff's doing behind closed doors. Maybe I'll have to eat the meat and spit out the bones, but I am going to take a posture like this. I do believe if there's just a fake culture in a church, that part of the body is not for you. And I get it. Like, hey, the preachers and sneaker stuff on, Instagram, I get it. It grosses me out, right?
Yeah.
Like, we had a guy legit show up to lead worship for us, and he had some shoes on that cost $500. And I said, he can't get on our stage with that because that communicates something I don't want communicated. Now, I don't know. Maybe my wife picks up my wardrobe, not me. Maybe I've worn a shirt I shouldn't have worn or something. So I don't know where that line is. But I think if we're thinking about it with humility, that's okay as long as we're on a journey towards Jesus with his church with it.
Yeah, I really like that. And, this is just a slight detour, but I'd be remiss not to take this opportunity, because I think that a lot of people who watch my channel might have a question along these lines. And you touched on it a bit here. And I have to say, I loved the part about the posture and taking the ownership of what you're doing there. But while we're sitting here, and while we've walked through this amazing space, I get these comments no matter where I go, whether it's gold in a Catholic church or it's LED screens in a church like this. But I want to get at this because I think you're going to be able to answer this well, of the people who think that there's just a gap between something being pretty and well done and it being authentic. Because so often that's what I hear when it comes to churches like this, that, I just want something authentic, and this doesn't feel authentic to me, and it's probably the most overused word that we don't really define in any meaningful way. But I think it would be a missed opportunity to sit here with this backdrop in this place and to not speak to those people who worry that something being well produced, which this is. I mean, you guys, I value the fact that you guys are out on time, that things are done well, right? Everything's tight. But there's people that are going to say, is that authentic? Does that work? And so I'd love for you to speak to that.
Absolutely. So my wife and I are foodies, okay? We tried a new restaurant last night,
Nice.
and somebody got us a gift card to it. It was great. I had this amazing dessert, unlike anything I'd ever had before, because it was like a take on Mexican, where it was like this weird churro ice cream sandwich with strawberries on top. I'm going back just for the dessert.
Yeah.
It was amazing. But when we go to a new restaurant, we don't go to chain restaurants, right? We want to try something new that has a chef where he's given us the same old thing, like it's going to be chicken, it's going to be ice cream for dessert, but his or her fresh take on it, right? Yeah. I don't want McDonald's when I go to a restaurant. McDonald's is mass-produced. It's like, is that real bread or is it cardboard? Sorry, McDonald's lovers. But that, I want the same old thing with a fresh take on it. But here's the thing. When I go to that restaurant last night, or any new good restaurant, it's well-produced, right?
Yeah.
They have great cleanliness procedures, because if the restaurant isn't clean, I'm leaving, right? They have good service. They were training my server last night, and she was saying like certain phrases, and she was writing things a certain way, and she was telling me the specials in a certain way. They check on us in certain times to refill my club soda, right? So it's well produced, but it's an authentic experience because it's a chef's unique take on this type of food, where I'm getting the same old thing, chicken, in a new way, in a well-produced environment. Yeah. And so I think, let's not confuse well-produced with fake. They can go together. And if I get fake, I'm out.
Right.
If I get every story has a bow, I'm out. Because, one day I won't work in a church, I'll just attend a church. Yeah. And I hope that's not for many years. But when that day comes, I will only be part of a church community that's authentic, that's real, where I see people bleed. Because I'm bleeding, and if I don't see other people bleeding, then this communicates. This is for people who have it together, even though I know no one here actually has it together. But if you act like you do, then I need to go somewhere else. Yeah. So I think well-produced can be authentic, and it may not be authentic. But I think we just have to look deeper. Just because something isn't well-produced doesn't make it authentic, right? Yeah. Just because something isn't evangelical doesn't make it authentic. Yeah. I have to look deeper always for it.
Yeah, and I think that's so true in all of life, that we like to just kind of throw out this platitude on the surface, that we have this truism like, oh, well-produced and authentic don't go together. But let's actually press into that and see, if we look, you're not going to use that same criteria with a restaurant, right? That if it's not authentic if it's well-produced. Well, I don't, like you said, those things can go together, authenticity and well-produced. I really appreciate you taking the time to answer that.
And I know this analogy is so overused, but it's just so true. If I get a bad meal at a restaurant, I don't not go to restaurants. Yeah. But I won't go to that one. Yeah. But I'll try a new one.
Well, I wanted to actually start to land the plane there, because there's kind of two concerns that go together in my head here. Of one, you mentioned this idea of, when I'm attending a church one day, if I find that it's all kind of ribbon-wrapped stories, then I'm not going to go there, right? And I think at the same time, there's a lot of people that might listen to this, watch the tour, and think, man, what you guys are doing here at Mosaic, it's compelling. I love it. This is really neat. But I got to tell you, Carl, this isn't my experience of church. Yeah. I've been to church. I've been burned, and I've all but given up on the church. And I think I see a lot of people who are there who say, like Gandhi, I like your Jesus, I don't like your Christians, right? Yeah. And I think people say, Carl, if this is what Mosaic really is, that's awesome. If I lived in the Columbia area, I'd come check it out. Yeah. But Carl, I've been to the churches near me. I've been burned by churches. Why shouldn't that person give up on the church?
I think the church teaches us grace. Philip Yancey has a great book title called Church, Why Bother?
Straight to the point.
He's been asking it for decades. Yeah. And a lot of his conclusion is simply the dysfunction of the church, seeing the dysfunction of the church, but knowing Jesus still calls it his bride that he's proud of and that he loves, teaches me something about grace I can't get outside the church. Yeah. Because as part of the church, I have to have grace for its leaders. I have to have grace for its attenders and members. I have to have grace for the volunteers who are jerks sometimes. Yeah. And it just teaches me a level of grace I can't get elsewhere. There's something is it Ephesians 5 where Paul talks about the husbands and wives, and he says this is a mystery, but I'm talking about Christ and the church. And I think, obviously you can be single and have a full life, because Jesus and Paul, I think, had full lives. Yeah. But I think there's something you learn about grace when you get married. that you can't learn another way. And that's what Paul's talking about in Ephesians 5. Even though he was single, he saw it.
Yeah.
He knew it. And I think by being part of a church, we learn something about the grace we must show and the grace that God shows us that we won't learn any other way. And so I'll end with this. I stumbled on a new name of God one time when I was reading my Bible. You know how there's like Jehovah Jireh or Emmanuel or names of God, right? So I came across, I think it was in Isaiah, I talk about it in the book, exactly where it is, but if you look at it in Hebrew, it's Adonai Yehovah Kalvatz Nadach.
All right.
Yes, it's a mouthful. But in English, it jumped off at the page at me, and it said, the Lord God who brings back the outcasts. And I just stopped. It was one of those times where I've read the Bible through so many times, but that phrase never jumped out at me. I just stopped and stared at those words on the page.
Yeah.
And thought, God, I needed to hear that because I'm an outcast. Because I have very dark parts of me. I have very sinful parts of me. And I wish when I got baptized that Jesus just took all those away, but he doesn't. I persist in a lot of those.
Yeah.
And I carry shame, and I feel alone, and I have evil thoughts. I am an outcast. But I worship the Lord God who brings back the outcasts. And I know I can't be a Christian by myself. And so as dysfunctional as the church can be, as messed up as it can be, you know, I hear the stories, I talk to the people. Look, we've hurt people as our church.
Yeah.
But I just think of those famous words, where else shall I go? As dysfunctional as it is, Winston Churchill once said, democracy is the worst form of government ever invented except for every other form. And I would argue that church is the worst form of community ever invented except for every other form of community.
Well, what a great way, not to use the metaphor we've been avoiding, but to wrap a bow on the conversation of starting with bloodstained pews and ending with Winston Churchill. I really do appreciate that. I want to just let people know where they can find the book, where they can find what you're doing here at Mosaic, because I think this book is going to help them. It won't be their 6-step plan to having a perfect life.
No.
But I think it will help them take those next steps. So how can they do that?
Yeah, so Bloodstained Pews is the book. Amazon, it's Kindle, audiobook, paperback, whatever your choice of consuming books is. And, I'd love to hear your story. I put my email address in there, and I'd love to hear your Bloodstained Pew story to continue the conversation. I will say, if the attitude of your viewers mirrors that of you, of one of curiosity and humility, I am very hopeful for the future of the American church.
Well, I really appreciate you saying that. And I know you're passionate about the local church, so just if people want to come to Mosaic because they're in the Columbia area and they don't have a church, how can they find you?
Yeah, mosaicchristian.org.
Okay.
Mosaicchristian.org is the easiest way. I mean, you find us on all the socials out there and all that stuff, but mosaicchristian.org.
Wonderful. Well, Carl, thank you so much.
All right, bye. It's been fun.